ArtAvalon Real Brush Pens are versatile tools that can be used in different ways to create many different types and styles of art. In this series of videos, I'm going to be demonstrating a number of different techniques that you can use to have a lot of fun with these pens. This video is going to be for beginners, those who are really inexperienced or maybe just new to art, so I'm going to be going back to the very basics. I want to start off talking about ink flow. Now, these are real brush pens, so they've got bristles rather than felt tips. What that means is that the ink is going to flow better out the very tip of the pen where the bristles end, rather than at the side of the bristles. The ink's still going to be stuck to the sides of the bristles, so you still get a little bit when you use the side. Even if you take your time with that stroke and you really give the ink time to reach the page, you're still going to find that you're going to get a patchy stroke. Next, I want to talk about how scale affects performance. Now, if you're drawing really big, you're going to find that it's really easy to get a patchy line like this. It's called the dry brush effect. So if you're drawing big and you want to make sure to get a really smooth line, just make sure to take your time, give the ink ample time to reach the page and fully saturate it before moving on with your stroke. Likewise, if you're drawing at a small scale, you're going to find that it's a lot easier to get a smooth line, even if you want to get a dry brush effect. Sometimes it's good for effects and textures and stuff, or different kinds of lettering. So if you're drawing small, but you want to get that dry brush effect, you can go faster with your stroke, and that will make it easier for you to get that patchy effect. These pen nibs are really flexible, so I like to keep a piece of scrap paper on hand so that I can push the brush shape into whatever I want. So right here I'm just tapping to push it into a really nice fine point, because these pens are really responsive to pressure, which makes them really good for things like lettering or line art. So here I'm just doing a demonstration of lettering. You can see that I can get a really nice thin line by using less pressure and a much thicker line by increasing the pressure a little bit. You do want to make sure to take your time with a thick line so that you get a nice solid line. Here's a demonstration of thin and thick lines. You're not just pushing down harder on the pen to get your thick lines, you're making sure to spread the bristles out so that you can deposit that ink completely onto the surface. As I mentioned before, these pens are also really good for line art. The flexibility of the brush nib allows for some really nicely weighted lines, and that just allows you to make some really nice dynamic organic pieces. It also allows you to carve out some really nice shapes for filling in and for shading, like you can see with her shirt and with her hair. And also it's really easy to switch between dry brush and normal fills, so that was really cool. This pen set comes with a water pen. It's a clear pen with a removable barrel. The barrel is hollow, you fill it with water, and then you can use the pen to paint water onto the rest of your ink. You can use it to blend and blur the colors, and it's a lot of fun to play around with. The barrel of the pen is flexible to allow you really easy control of the water. You squeeze the barrel if you want to push more water out, and you let go of it when you don't need quite as much. So you just fill the barrel with water and then screw the lid back on, and we are ready to paint. One way to paint with these is to lay the color down with the pens on the paper and then using the water brush to blend them out. This is going to be easiest with fresh ink. You'll probably want to make sure to clean out your water brush once you're done blending. You can also do the same thing with old ink. It's not going to be quite as easy to move around as the fresh does, but I think that can be pretty fun to play with. You can definitely see the original shape a lot more distinctly on the old, and if you want to, you can try to work at it, but it'll be hard to get that to move. Now, if you do decide that you want to work at that original shape until it goes away, you can do that, but make sure that you're aware of the dangers of overworking your paper. This will kind of depend on what paper you're using, but usually you'll get what's called pilling, and it's these little paper booger things that stick to your painting. They don't look very nice, and they can also be kind of dangerous to your pen. You'll want to make sure to wash out your water pen really well if this happens to you, because if those paper bits get stuck in there, they can clog up your nib, give you water flow issues in the future, and they can make it wear out faster. I also want to talk a little bit about the transparent nature of ink, which is not that exciting. It just means that if you layer it a lot, it's going to get darker. So here you can see the difference between this ink that I'm working a whole lot at and the side of that little square that I only put one layer on. Also keep in mind that if you put other colors over it, it's just going to add to it, not replace it. So if you keep layering other colors over each other, you're gonna eventually end up with kind of a mushy dark brown / black / gray color. And it's also gonna kind of strain your paper, because that's a lot of ink for it to hold. So when you go to paint something, you'll probably want to have a pretty good idea of what you want it to look like at the end, because if there's anything that you want to be white, like highlights, you're probably gonna want to make sure to just leave the paper white as you're painting it. That way you don't have to try to go in with whiteout or anything to make your highlights. You can also use the pens to lay directly down on the paper for the darkest areas, and then you can go back in with your water brush and move it around, and then you get yourself a nice medium mid-tone. and that can be really fun to play around with. Now I want to talk a little bit about paper, and the kind of paper that you're going to use with these is going to make a pretty big difference in the results that you're going to get, as well as the techniques that you're able to reliably use with them. Now there's a lot of different kinds of paper out there, especially different kinds of art papers, and I will talk about the relevant ones in other videos, but for now I wanted to talk about the difference between printer and copy paper because they're probably the easiest to find and the cheapest out there, and especially if you're a beginner you may not want to use really expensive fancy paper to kind of learn on. I'll also talk a little bit about how the weight of paper affects things. So, first I'm going to start off with a copy paper. I'm just going to lay down some color and test to see how well the water pen can move the color around. And it does pretty well. Copy paper is pretty bare bones. So now I have some printer paper, and printer paper, being made to go through printers, is designed to absorb the ink super quickly. That way when it goes through the rest of the printer, it doesn't smudge or get ink all over everything. So when you try to move the pigment around with the water brush, you're not going to get a whole lot of side-to-side movement. But what you will get is movement through the paper because it's made to suck the ink down. Now with that knowledge, I'm going to test each kind of paper to see how much it bleeds through the page. So I'm going to start with the printer paper because I expect that'll bleed more than the copy paper. One coat of ink doesn't really do a whole lot, but it doesn't take a lot more in the way of working at that spot to get it to bleed through a little bit. You can imagine that if I started working at it more, it would probably bleed through more. So then with the copy paper, I'm going to try the same thing, a generous coating of ink on one side, flip it over, check the back. There's not really any bleeding to speak of at all at first, so the next step is to try and work at it, just like I did with the printer paper. And I think I worked at it even more, and it still is bleeding less than the printer paper does, which isn't really a surprise, I suppose, but it's good to note that you could force it on the copy paper if you worked really hard at it. So it's good to keep in mind. So then, does that make copy paper better than printer paper? Of course, the answer is not necessarily. Here's a line art test on the copy paper where I have drawn a circle in the black pen and I'm filling it in with the turquoise. As you can see, the outlines smudge pretty readily on the copy paper into the turquoise center. So here's the same test over again on the printer paper, and you'll find that the printer paper holds the ink pretty well in a lateral direction. Even when I try to really smudge it purposefully going over the lines, it still holds pretty well. Another thing to keep in mind is that the ink is going to look different on different kinds of paper. So I'm just going to run a quick lettering test, same word, same color on each paper. I will also say there's definitely a difference in feeling when you are laying the ink down. The printer paper kind of grabs the ink from your pen, if that makes sense. But at the end of this, you can definitely see the color is a lot more vivid and intense on the printer paper than the copier paper. The last thing that I wanted to talk about in regards to paper for this video is in the difference in thickness. So here I have two different weights of the same type of paper. It's the printer paper again. So this first one is the thinner version. You can see it already buckled with just that little ink test. I'm going to do the same thing on the thicker version of this paper, and I'm really trying to saturate it with this grain properly. As you can see, there's not a whole lot in the way of buckling on the thicker paper, so that's something to keep in mind. It'll be sturdier. Now, printer paper is not really great for painting, and so I'm going to go ahead and drop water on it because I know that'll make it buckle. So on the light version, I'm dropping it on there, and you can already see just tons and tons of wrinkles there, really quite thin, kind of flimsy paper. The second one, I'm going to drop it in there, and it's also going to buckle, but I think after looking at it, probably buckles slightly less. You'll definitely see a difference in the back sides of them in noting how much the pigment has bled through to the other side. The thinner paper is quite a bit more than the thicker paper in that regard. Now, to end this video, I thought I would do a small little painting, just a simple little landscape, using some of the techniques that I talked about in this video. So I used some dry brushing on the hill in the foreground because I thought that it gave it a nice grassy texture. And here I'm using the water brush to draw some pigment out from the front hill. Rather than blending it out all the way, I wanted to create lighter hills of the same color in the background, so that I could give it an atmospheric perspective look. I used the water pen for blending the blue and the sky together. The water pen gave the blue a really nice soft edge, which helped the clouds to look softer and foggier. I knew before I started painting the sky that I would want some fluffy white clouds, so I made sure to leave some blank space on the paper for them and just blend a little bit of the blue into them to shape them. So, this is about where we are with what we've learned so far. There are many more techniques and fun things that we can do with these pens. I'll talk more about them in the next video, which I hope that you'll check out. Thanks for watching! Bye!